A 70-year-old woman walks into a grocery store to buy milk and bread, but minutes later, she's in handcuffs, accused of stealing and dragged away, while everyone watches in silence. No one listens. No one checks the cameras. A rush trial is ready to convict her, but when she picks up the phone and calls her son, the entire courtroom goes silent. Will justice prevail, or will she be buried by a broken system? Drop a comment below. Do you think justice is truly for everyone, or only for those with power? Now, let's dive into this gripping story. The late afternoon sun hung low in the sky, casting long golden streaks across the worn pavement of Chestnut Street. The heat clung to the air, thick and heavy, making every breath feel like an effort. Jessica Carter stepped onto her small front porch, gripping the rusted railing as she slowly descended the steps. Her knees aged, a dull, persistent pain she had grown accustomed to over the years' arthritis. They told her nothing to do but manage it. She adjusted the wide-brimmed hat, shielding her from the sun, glancing up at the towering apartment buildings that had replaced the modest homes of her youth. The neighborhood had changed. The faces were different. The warm greetings and familiar nods of old had faded, replaced by the distant stares of new, wealthier residents who walked these streets like they belonged. While she had become invisible, Jessica had lived here for over 40 years. She had raised a son here, buried, a husband here, taught generations of children in this very city, and yet some days, it felt as if the world had moved on without her. But today was simple, just an errand, milk and bread from Mike's Market. She reached into the pocket of her light summer dress, feeling for the neatly folded $10 bill. It was all she needed. Jamal Carter, her boy. The thought of him brought a familiar warmth to her chest. The pride, the love, the ache. Jamal was no longer the little boy who used to run home from school, eager to tell her about his day. No longer. The teenager who would sit at their small kitchen table, determined to argue his way through every debate. Team practice. He was a man, now a powerful man. The U.S. Attorney General, her son, the highest-ranking law enforcement officer in the country. The voice of justice, the defender of truth, but in all his success, all his triumphs, there were days. She wondered if he still saw the world the way she did, if he still remembered what it felt like to be powerless. He called when he could, sent gifts when he forgot. Always loving, always respectful, but always busy. Too busy for long visits, too busy for long conversations, too busy to see how much she missed him. Jessica never said it. She never would. A mother's love was not measured in how often a son returned home, but in the knowledge that he was out there safe, doing good in the world still. She longed for the sound of his laughter in the house again, the weight of his presence, the comfort of knowing she wasn't alone. But today, she wouldn't think of that. Today was just an errand. Jessica moved slowly down the sidewalk. Each step measured, careful. The summer heat pressed against her skin, thick and stifling. She clutched her small purse a little tighter, not out of fear but habit. The streets felt different now. There were more glass storefronts, more modern cafes filled with younger, wealthier residents. People who sipped their overpriced lattes, who looked past her as if she were part of the landscape. Just another relic of past. They were eager to erase. She sighed, shaking the thought away. Not today. Jessica Carter had lived long enough to know how the world worked. She knew the rules. Don't linger too long. Keep your hands where they can be seen. Move with purpose, but not too fast. Don't give them a reason. She had taught these lessons to her son when he was a boy, and now decades later, they were still etched into her own bones, unshaken by time. She reached the entrance of Mike's Market, a small locally owned store that had somehow managed to survive the wave of gentrification. The bell chimed softly as she stepped inside. The blast of air conditioning was an immediate relief, a momentary escape from the oppressive heat outside. Jessica straightened her back, adjusting her hat. Just a quick trip in and out. She moved toward the dairy aisle, her fingers brushing over the cool glass of the refrigerator door. Milk first, then bread, then home. Simple. She had no idea her world was about to change. The store hummed with quiet normalcy. The low whir of refrigerators, the occasional beep of the register, the distant chatter of customers. Jessica Carter stood in the dairy aisle, reaching for a carton of milk. The cool condensation against her fingertips was refreshing. A welcome relief from the lingering heat outside. Then movement, a flicker of motion in her peripheral vision. A young man, maybe early 20s, hoodie up, head down, moving fast. Jessica's eyes followed him instinctively. His hands darted across the shelves, stuffing energy bars into his pockets in quick practice motions. He barely hesitated before pivoting toward the exit at his pace, shifting from cautious to hurried, and then beep, beep. The alarm shrieked through the store. The sound snapped the air like a whip. Jessica turned just as the thief lunged for the door, shoving it open with his shoulder. He vanished into the busy street, the electronic chime of the entrance still ringing as his shadow disappeared. For a moment, there was silence. Then, "Hey, stop right there." A deep, commanding voice cut through the tension like a blade. Jessica flinched. She turned her head expecting to see someone, anyone chasing after the thief. But no one was running. The young man was gone, and yet a man in a navy polo was striding toward her, tall, broad-shouldered, a clipped badge glinting on his belt, an off-duty cop. His eyes locked onto hers, sharp and unwavering. Jessica's stomach twisted. Something was wrong. "You." The officer's voice was cold, firm. Jessica's lips parted. What hands were I can see them? A hard lump formed in her throat. I don't understand. The officer closed the distance between them in 3 long strides before she could react, his hand clamped around her frail arm. Strong, unyielding. Jessica inhaled sharply. "Let go of me." She protested, twisting slightly in his grip. "You think you're slick?" His voice was steady, certain, like he had already made up his mind. "Empty your pockets." Jessica blinked. "Pockets," she echoed, baffled. She lifted the small plastic shopping basket still hooked in the crook of her arm. "I haven't even paid yet." The officer barely acknowledged her words. The alarm went off. He stated flatly, "And you were right here." Jessica's pulse pounded in her ears. She turned toward the counter, toward Mike, the owner Mike. She called, her voice tight with urgency. "Tell him you saw I didn't take anything." Mike stood behind the register, frozen. His eyes darted between Jessica and the officer for a second. A flicker of hesitation crossed his face. He knew he had seen. He could tell them the truth. But then his expression shuddered. His shoulders stiffened. He cleared his throat, eyes dropping to the counter, and he said nothing. Jessica's breath caught. "Mike," she tried again, her voice cracking pleas. The betrayal stung worse than the accusation itself. "Come with me." The officer ordered, his grip tightening. Jessica's body tense. "No, I haven't done anything wrong." Her voice rose, edged with panic. A few customers turned their heads, watching some whispering, others raising their phones, but no one stepped forward. No one intervened. The officer didn't wait for her compliance. He spun her around in one swift motion, forcing her hands behind her back. Jessica gasped, clicked the cold steel of handcuffs, bit into her thin wrists. The room tilted, her knees nearly buckled under the weight of it all. The humiliation, the disbelief, the crushing helplessness. This couldn't be happening. This wasn't real. Her hands shook against the unforgiving metal. She blinked rapidly, heart hammering outside through the glass doors. The streak buzzed with life. The boy in the hoodie was gone free. Jessica Carter, a 70-year-old woman who had come to buy milk, stood in handcuffs. A siren wailed in the distance, growing louder, and just like that, her world came crashing down. The ride to the station was silent, except for the occasional crackle of the police radio. Jessica sat stiffly in the back seat, her hands still bound behind her wrists, aching against the metal cuffs through the window. The city passed by in blurs of neon and asphalt cars, honking people walking life moving forward, completely indifferent to the fact that for her time had stopped. Her mind raced, trying to make sense of it all. How? How had she gone from shopping for milk to sitting in the back of a police car treated like a common criminal? She wanted to scream, to demand answers, to make them listen. But deep down, she already knew. She knew how the world worked. She had known it her whole life. The system didn't need proof. It just needed someone to blame. And tonight, that someone was her. The moment they pulled into the station, the doors unlocked with a mechanical click. The officer in the front seat didn't even glance at her as he stepped out. The back door swung open and rough hands gripped her arm. "Let's go." Jessica winced as she was hauled to her feet. her joints protesting. The sudden movement inside the station was bright, too bright. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed faintly, casting harsh shadows. Across the scuffed linoleum floor, the air smelled of stale coffee, sweat, and old paper. A wall of desks, officers and ringing phones stretched before her. It was chaotic, busy, yet no one seemed to care about the elderly woman being led inside in handcuffs. No one even looked up. Just another arrest. Just another case number. Jessica opened her mouth, her voice hoarse, please. She said barely above a whisper, "This is a mistake." No response. She tried again. Louder this time, "I didn't steal anything." A nearby officer chuckled under his breath. Yeah, that's what they all say." Jessica's chest tightened. She turned to the man leading her, the same officer who had arrested her in the store. "Check the cameras," she pleaded. "Please just check them." "You'll see we don't need to check the cameras," he said flatly, steering her forward. Jessica's stomach dropped. He wasn't interested in the truth. He never had been. A heavy metal door swung open ahead, revealing a long hallway lined with holding cells. Another officer, taller, broader, with a thick mustache and a badge that read. Sergeant Hawkins glanced up from his clipboard as they approached. "First, shoplifting," he muttered, barely sparing. Jessica, a glance got her at Mike's Market. The arresting officer, confirmed owner, didn't see the act, but she was right by the shelf. When the alarm went off, Jessica's hands clenched into fists. "That's not true," she said firmly, trying to keep her voice steady. "I was standing there because I was shopping. The real thief ran past me." Hawkins sighed, flipping a page. "Camera footage?" he asked. The officer shrugged, didn't check silence. Jessica's pulse pounded in her ears. Hawkins didn't react, didn't even blink. He simply scribbled something down and gestured toward a row of empty holding cells. "Processing first, then she waits." Jessica shook her head. No, this isn't right," she said, her voice breaking. "You can't just—" A sharp tug on her arm cut her off. She stumbled forward, through another door into another room. A camera flashed. Jessica blinked against the harsh white light. Another flash, her mugshot a machine word as it scanned her fingertips, recording her fingerprints. An officer, this one younger, barely out of his 20s, slid a form across the table toward her sign. Here, Jessica swallowed the lump in her throat. Her hands trembled as she gripped the pen. For a moment, she hesitated. Signing felt like accepting this, like admitting that she belonged here, but she had no choice. The ink scratched against the paper as she scrawled her name. Her dignity felt like it was being erased with every stroke. As soon as the cuffs were replaced with tight plastic zip ties, she was led out of the room. Another officer took over this one younger, nervous officer, Williams. He glanced at her, then at the paperwork in his hands. Then back at her. Jessica saw it. The hesitation, the doubt. Something in his expression shifted, like he was questioning why a frail, elderly woman had been booked for shoplifting in the first place. Jessica seized the moment, son, she said quietly. "Please just check the cameras." Williams hesitated for a split second. He actually looked like he might listen, but before he could say a word, Williams, a barked voice, snapped across the room. Sergeant Hawkins Williams stiffened. "You got a problem?" Hawkins asked, narrowing his eyes. Williams hesitated. "Sir, She fits the description." The words felt like a gavel final. "Absolute." Williams swallowed hard. His gaze flickered toward Jessica once more, but then slowly he nodded. "No problem, sir." Jessica's heart sank. She had seen this before. A young officer, a conscience trying to claw its way to the surface, and then just like that beaten back into place. She had no power here. She had no voice. She was just another case number, another file in the system. Jessica Carter, 70 years old, booked, processed, forgotten. The cold metal bench pressed hard against Jessica's back as she sat in the holding cell, hands resting limply on her lap. The room was dimly lit, washed in the sterile glow of a flickering fluorescent light. The air was thick with the stale scent of sweat and disinfectant, heavy with the weight of time. She exhaled slowly, trying to steady the tremor in her fingers. She had never been inside a jail cell before, Never thought she would be a lifetime of doing the right thing, following the rules, staying in her place. What had it amounted to? A case number, an accusation without evidence? No one had cared. Jessica swallowed against the dryness in her throat, her gaze drifting to the woman sitting across from her, young, maybe mid-20s, dark skin, tired eyes. She sat hunched forward, arms wrapped around herself as if trying to disappear into the shadows. A mother. Jessica could see it in the way the woman sat, like someone who was used to holding the weight of the world on her shoulders. Someone who had fought too many battles, lost too many times. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then the woman shifted, glancing up at Jessica hesitantly. "They got you too, huh?" Her voice was quiet, edged with exhaustion. Jessica offered a faint, bitter smile. "Seems that way." The woman nodded, exhaling through her nose. She looked down at her hands, fidgeting with the frayed cuffs of her sweatshirt. "Why are you here?" Jessica asked gently. The woman scoffed, shaking her head. "I took a granola bar." She said, her voice laced with disbelief for my little girl. She was hungry. I didn't have enough cash, and I thought she trailed off, biting her lip. Jessica's chest ached. A granola bar. She thought about the young man at the store, stuffing handfuls of food into his hoodie, sprinting out the door free. Yet here sat a mother locked in a cell for trying to feed her child. Jessica shook her head slowly. "It's not right." She murmured. The woman let out a dry, humorless laugh. "Right?" She echoed. "Right. Doesn't matter." In places like this, Jessica fell silent because she knew. She had spent her whole life believing that if you did what was right, if you followed the rules, if you were patient and kind, the world would return that kindness. Sitting here in this cold, unforgiving room, surrounded by the weight of injustice, she wasn't sure she believed that anymore. The woman exhaled sharply, rubbing her face with her hands. "My baby's with my sister." She said more to herself than to Jessica. "I don't know how long they'll keep me here. I don't even know if I'll be able to fight it." Jessica felt something shift in her, a quiet anger, a slow simmering fury, not just for herself, but for the woman in front of her. For all the women who had sat in this very cell before them. For all the ones who never made it out. She reached across the empty space between them, gently placing her hand over the younger woman's. "You will," Jessica said softly, firmly. "You will fight it." The woman looked at her, something flickering behind her tired eyes. Hope, or maybe just the faint memory of it. A heavy silence settled over them. Jessica leaned back against the wall, staring at the ceiling, listening to the quiet hum of the lights above. For the first time that night, she wasn't thinking about herself. She was thinking about her son, and whether she had the strength to call him. The door to the holding cell creaked open. The uniformed officer stood in the doorway, clipboard in hand, expression blank, detached. Just another routine night for him. "Carter," he called. Jessica sat up straighter, her back stiff from the cold bench. She felt the young woman beside her stir, but didn't look away from the officer. He gestured with his chin. "You get one call." A call for a split-second relief flickered through her. Jamal, her son, her boy. He could fix this. He had the power, the authority. He could make a call. One call, and this entire nightmare would disappear, like smoke in the wind. Her mind raced ahead, playing out the scenario. Jamal answering on the first ring, his voice groggy but alert. "Mama, what's wrong?" His sharp intake of breath as she explained the silence on the other end, as he processed it, and then the quiet storm in his voice. "I'll handle it." Jessica inhaled, pushing herself to her feet. She followed the officer down a dimly lit hallway, past rows of desks cluttered with paperwork, coffee cups, and overworked officers too busy to spare her a glance. A phone sat on a metal counter, old and scratched the cord, frayed from years of use. The officer gestured toward it. "You got 5 minutes, 5 minutes, 5 minutes to make this go away. 5 minutes to hand her dignity over to someone else." Jessica reached out, fingers hovering over the receiver, and then she stopped. Her hand trembled just slightly. She swallowed. Jamal had worked his whole life to become the man he was today. He had fought for everything he had. He had risen higher than she ever dreamed possible for him. And now, after all that, she was supposed to drag him back to the place he had spent his whole life trying to escape. To remind him that no matter how much success he had, how much power he wielded, at the end of the day, his mother was still just another black woman who could be thrown into a cell without a second thought. Would this make him hangry? Of course. Would he fix it? Without a doubt, but at what cost? Would it make him look weak? Would it be a headline tomorrow? Attorney General's mother arrested for shoplifting. Was it special treatment? Would they say he only fought for justice when it was personal? Jessica exhaled shakily. She couldn't do that to him. She had spent her entire life protecting him from this world. She would not be the reason they turned on him. Now slowly she withdrew her hand. The officer tapped his pen against his clipboard, impatience flickering across his face. You making the call or not? Jessica straightened her spine. Her voice when she spoke was steady. No, the officer frowned. You sure? She nodded. Once I'll see myself through this. She turned, stepping back toward the hallway, back toward the holding cell. She wouldn't call. She wouldn't beg. She had lived 70 years on this earth without needing favors. She wasn't about to start now. But as she walked back to her seat, the cold settling deeper into her bones, she wondered for the first time in her life, had she made the wrong choice? The courtroom was cold, not in temperature, but in feeling. Jessica sat stiffly at the defendant's table, her wrists aching from the tight zip ties, her body worn from a night of little sleep. The fluorescent lights overhead cast a harsh glare on everything. The polished wood of the judge's bench, the neatly stacked files on the prosecutor's table, the indifference on the faces around her. She had been in this room before, not as a defendant, but as a woman who believed in justice. She had sat in the gallery once years ago, watching a case unfold, believing, truly believing, that the law would always prevail, that truth would rise to the surface like oil on water. Now she wasn't so sure at the front of the room. Judge Thomas Mercer adjusted his glasses, his sharp blue eyes, scanning over the papers in front of him. He barely spared her a glance. Jessica recognized men like him, men who had made up their minds before the trial had even begun. Let's proceed. He said, his voice clipped efficient, like this was just another case to get through. The prosecutor stood a man in a crisp gray suit, with a voice as smooth as glass, and a demeanor that screamed confidence, Your Honor. He began, the defendant was found at the scene of the crime. The arresting officer witnessed her in the immediate vicinity of the stolen goods. Given her proximity and the circumstances, it is clear. Jessica's jaw tightened. Immediate vicinity. That's what they were calling it. She had been shopping. She had been buying milk. Her hands clenched in her lap, nails pressing into her palms. Her so-called defense attorney, a tired-looking man in a wrinkled suit, barely lifted his head, Your Honor. He muttered, flipping lazily through the case file, as if he had only just picked it up. We'd like to request a review of the store's security footage. Finally, Jessica exhaled her heart, lifting for a brief second. If they just saw the footage, if they just looked, no need, the prosecutor interrupted smoothly. Jessica's breath caught. We've already confirmed, the prosecutor continued. His voice steady, rehearsed that the camera system at Mike's Market was malfunctioning that day. Silence. Jessica's fingers curled around the edge of the table. No Judge Mercer barely reacted. He simply nodded, as if he had already expected that answer. Jessica turned sharply to her lawyer. Say something. She whispered, her voice, urgent, desperate. He sighed, rubbed his temples. The camera's down, he muttered. Not much we can do about that. Not much we can do. Jessica felt the words like a slap. She looked back at Judge Mercer, at the prosecutor, at the jury, what little of them there was. They had already decided it didn't matter what was true. It didn't matter that she had done nothing wrong. This wasn't about justice. This was about convenience. This was about putting the right person in a cell to close the case, and she, a 70-year-old black woman with no power, no influence, was the easiest target in the room. The trial was moving too fast. Jessica felt like she was drowning, like the words were swirling around her, but none of them made sense. Her lawyer wasn't fighting for her. The judge wasn't listening to her. The system that she had believed in was discarding her like an afterthought. Her throat tightened. She would lose. They would bury her, and no one would care. The prosecution recommends setting bail at $10,000, the prosecutor said smoothly. Jessica's head snapped up. Her chest tightened. 10,000. She let out a breathless, disbelieving laugh. $10,000 for a carton of milk and a loaf of bread for nothing. She turned to her lawyer, waiting for him to object, to push back. He didn't. Instead, he was adjusting his tie, already moving on in his mind. That was it. That was all they had. Jessica felt her world narrowing, the walls pressing in. She couldn't fight this, not alone. Her breath came shorter, shallower, and then a thought, a name, Jamal. Jessica hesitated. She had told herself she wouldn't call him. She had told herself she would see this through alone. But now it wasn't just about her dignity. It was about survival. Slowly, she lifted her hands, Your Honor. She said, her voice barely above a whisper. Judge Mercer lifted an eyebrow. Jessica swallowed the knot in her throat. I'd like to make my one phone call. Mercer nodded. The bailiff approached, leading her to the phone on the wall near the courtroom doors. Jessica's hands shook as she lifted the receiver. She had never felt this small, this powerless. She dialed the number from memory. The ringing on the other end was deafening. Once, twice, then click a familiar voice. Mama. Jessica's lips parted, but no words came out. Her throat burned. Mama, what's wrong? Jamal's? Voice sharpened instantly. Alert. Jessica exhaled, shakily, then barely above a whisper. Jamal, baby, I need you. The courtroom seemed to hold its breath. For the first time since this nightmare began, Jessica wasn't alone. The heavy wooden doors of the courtroom swung open with a dull thud. All heads turned. A tall man in a tailored navy suit strode in his polished shoes, clicking sharply against the marble floor. His presence was commanding electric, like a storm rolling in. Jessica had seen her son in many places. Graduation stages, courtrooms, the evening news, but never like this. Never with his jaw set like steel, his eyes burning with controlled fury, his entire being radiating a presence that demanded attention, demanded respect. This wasn't just her boy. This was Jamal Carter, United States Attorney General. He had come for his mother. A hush fell over the room. Even Judge Mercer, who had barely looked at Jessica before straightened in his seat, Jamal's eyes scanned the courtroom until they found her. And in that moment, Jessica felt the slightest crack in the wake pressing against her chest. She wasn't alone anymore, but the prosecutor, he was already standing, already moving, already trying to get ahead of the storm that was coming, Your Honor. He said, voice smooth, unwavering, is highly inappropriate. The presence of Jamal didn't wait for permission. He walked straight to the defense table, his hands gripping the back of Jessica's chair, his mother in a courtroom on trial for nothing. His voice was calm, but the thunder underneath it was unmistakable. I want to see the footage. The prosecutor let out a breathless laugh, shaking his head. Mr. Carter, we've already determined that the store's surveillance system was malfunctioning that day. There is no... Jamal turned his gaze locked onto the prosecutor, a silent challenge. The room tensed. I want to see the footage, Jamal repeated right now. The prosecutor cleared his throat, glancing toward Judge Nudge Mercer, looking for backup. The judge hesitated a moment too long. Jessica saw it. Then the shift. Jamal wasn't just asking, he was applying pressure. And suddenly the judge, the prosecutor, the officers in the room, they all knew that this was no longer a case they could sweep away. This wasn't just an elderly woman accused of shoplifting. This was the mother of the U.S. Attorney General, and if they weren't careful, this courtroom would become the next national headline. Judge Mercer's sighed, adjusting his glasses. He turned to the prosecutor. Is there footage? A pause? A hesitation? And then finally, the prosecutor exhaled sharply. There is... He admitted Jessica's stomach dropped. So they had lied. They had known all along. Jamal's jaw tightened. His grip on the chair never loosened. He turned to the judge. I request an immediate order to present the footage in this courtroom. Judge Mercer hesitated, but this time he had no way out. Granted, he said, voice tight. Show the footage. The courtroom held its breath. An officer wheeled in a laptop, connecting it to the overhead projector. The screen flickered, and then... There she was, Jessica Carter, moving slowly through the store, her basket hanging from her arm. She reached for the milk. She placed it in her basket. She turned, and there, on the far side of the aisle, a young man in a gray hoodie moved swiftly, stuffing energy bars into his pockets before darting toward the exit. Jessica barely reacted. She wasn't looking at him. She wasn't paying attention. She was just shopping. The footage played on, showing the thief running, showing the alarm blaring, showing Jessica standing there shocked, confused, before an officer stormed in and grabbed her the moment it ended. Silence crashed down on the room, thick, heavy. Jessica's fingers curled around the edge of the table, gripping it like an anchor. She turned slowly to the prosecutor. He looked pale. His throat bobbed as he swallowed. Judge Mercer leaned back in his chair. His fingers tapped against the desk, his lips pressing into a thin line. He glanced toward Jamal, then finally toward Jessa. "The charges," he said, stiffly, "are dismissed." It should have felt like relief, like victory. But Jessica just sat there, the weight of the past 24 hours pressing against her ribs. It wasn't relief, it was exhaustion, because the truth had been there all along. They just hadn't cared to look. The judge's gavel struck the wooden bench with a sharp, final thud. Case dismissed. Jessica Carter was free, but she didn't feel victorious. She stood slowly, the stiffness in her joints almost numbing the deeper ache inside her chest. The courtroom buzzed around her lawyers, whispering papers, shuffling the creak of wooden benches as people stood to leave. But Jessica remained still. Her gaze drifted upward, locking onto Judge Thomas Mercer. For the first time since she had entered this courtroom, he looked at her, really looked at her. There was no apology in his eyes, no regret. Just a careful, measured silence. Jessica took a breath, a deep, steady inhale. Then she spoke. Her voice wasn't angry, it wasn't loud, but it cut through the air like a blade. "If I didn't have a powerful son, would justice have stood by me?" Today the words hung there, heavy, suffocating. No one answered because they all knew the truth. Jessica held his gaze a moment longer, then turned. She walked toward the courtroom doors, her steps slow, deliberate. She was free. But this wasn't justice. This was a favor. Favors were not the same as fairness. By the time Jessica stepped outside, the world was already moving. Reporters, cameras, flashing lights, a whirlwind of microphones shoved in her direction. "Ms. Carter, how do you feel about your case being dismissed? Were you targeted because of your race? Mr. Carter, how do you respond to the accusations against this court?" Jamal moved in front of her, his broad frame blocking the swarm of reporters. No comments. He said firmly, guiding his mother toward a waiting car, but the storm had already begun that evening. Jessica's face was on the news. A headline scrolled across the screen. Attorney General's mother wrongfully arrested a case of racial bias. The footage from the store was played on every major network. People watched, people reacted. The public demanded answers within days. An internal investigation into Judge Mercer and the prosecutor's handling of the case was announced for once the system was being forced to answer for itself. The house was quiet. Jessica sat by the window, the city stretching beyond the glass lights, twinkling in the distance. She should have felt safe, but the weight of the past 24 hours still sat heavy in her chest. She had spent a lifetime believing in fairness, in playing by the rules, and yet, in the end, it wasn't truth. That saved her. It was power. Her fingers traced the rim of the teacup in her hands, the warmth grounding her. Then the phone rang. She reached for it, pressing it to her ear. "Hello?" There was a pause then. Jamal's voice, low and steady. "Mama, I promise I won't let this happen to anyone else." Jessica closed her eyes. A slow, deep breath outside the city pulsed with life, and for the first time in a long time, she felt something stir in her chest. Not anger, not sadness, but hope. Thank you for joining us on this emotional journey of injustice, resilience, and the power of truth. Jessica's story is a stark reminder that fairness shouldn't depend on who you know. It should be a right for everyone. If this story moved you, don't forget to leave a comment and let us know where you're listening from. Did it make you think? Did it challenge you? Share it with someone who needs to hear it. And make sure to hit subscribe and tap the bell so you never miss another story that makes you question, reflect, and demand better. We'll be back soon with more powerful tales that stay with you long after they're over. Until next time, stay hopeful, stay strong, and never stop fighting for what's right.